Welcome back. Thanks for dropping by. I'm Bronzedrag0n. I like to talk about gaming news, and lately, if you've been following me, you know that I've dove into Diablo IV, well, at least the early access and now the open beta weekend. Over the last week, since the open beta weekend went through, a large topic on the forefront of this game is the fact that it was damaging. People were claiming that it was damaging some of their graphics cards. This became concerning to me, and obviously I didn't want to damage my graphics card, so I wanted to find out more information. And along the way, I ran upon this video by Ginger Gaming Mentor. Shout out to Ginger. And I will leave the link to his video in my show notes. So if you want to, you can go check that out. But I wanted to go ahead and listen to him and comment and see what he has to say about this situation.
Articles and various Reddit posts, and even a post on the official Diablo IV forums of people complaining that Diablo IV has bricked their 3080 Ti.
Yeah, I've seen those, and they just steadily more and more came in over the week.
Now, this is the specific card in question that seems to be the only one that is getting bricked. Now, I can't guarantee you that there are no other cards that will have an issue, but so far, from everything I've been able to gather from the multiple forum posts and multiple Reddit posts and multiple news articles that I have perused, there doesn't seem to be any cards other than this specific card, the Gigabyte RTX 3080 Ti. Now,
yeah, whenever I initially found out about this, my thought process was, well, is it just the 3080? Or is it the whole 30 series? Because I have a 3070. But as he said, the only one that appears to be affected is the Gigabyte 3080 Ti.
Now, why is it this specific card? Well, the answer to the question lies in, can a game actually brick a video card? And the answer is kind of yes and kind of no. Now, can a game brick a fully functional video card? No. However, imagine a situation where you never drive a car over 70 miles an hour, and you never find out that there is some sort of fatal flaw within your car, which would only trigger when you drive your car 150 miles an hour. All right? You might potentially drive this car for the rest of your life and never know that there was a fatal flaw. However, if one...
This is a good comparison, and I think it leads to a discussion of incorrectly made hardware, or as we all know, or if you're unfamiliar, when you make a board or when you make a chip, they're not all the same. You could say, okay, I'm making 3080 Ti's. Well, every single one of those GPU chips that are made are not the same, and some of them are inferior and may have passed through the inspection process and shouldn't have.
One day you found yourself in a situation where you had to push the car to this, 150 mile per hour limit.
It's a good comparison.
Upon reaching the 150 miles per hour, your car might spontaneously combust in a ball of flames. This is something that you would, see a recall on. The manufacturer would be like, hey,
definitely,
we're going to need you to come into the shop. There's a potentially fatal flaw, just a teensy-weensy one, that if you go over 150 miles an hour, the car may spontaneously combust into flames. So
I agree with this comparison. Obviously, with the car, they'd have to recall it, but with the graphics card, they're not going to recall it. They're just going to wait until it fails on you, and if it's still within warranty, they might replace it for you, depending upon if you're lucky.
Basically, what's going on here is that the Gigabyte RTX 3080 Ti has some sort of fatal flaw in it, which only arises upon being pushed to an extreme limit, essentially stressing out the card. Now, what is it in Diablo IV that is stressing out the card that pushes it to this extreme limit?
Cutscenes.
The answer is apparently a cutscene. Apparently there is a cutscene within Diablo IV that when the cutscene plays, it apparently pushes the card to unforeseen limits, which causes the catastrophic failure.
And when that first big cutscene happened in the game, my computer was chugging. And I don't have a high-end computer, but I'm running a 3070 with 32 gigs of RAM and a pretty decent 9-core AMD processor, and it was still chugging.
The catastrophic failure is essentially that the card no longer works. And is there potentially a way that you could get around this? Well, if it is indeed pushing the system to insane heights, like for instance 1,000 frame rate or 2,000 frames per second or whatever the hell's going on in the background,
I'll just stop here and I'll just say that the developers, when they're putting these cutscenes in, should have put a limit in on there. This shouldn't be coming through to gaming PCs.
could potentially, maybe, force a situation where the system is not allowed to go over a certain amount of frames, which would put an arbitrary limitation on the system, kind of like a governor on a car, which would prevent the car from going over a certain mile per hour.
Once again, it's a good comparison to the car.
Itself. Now, there is one within the game that you can use, and this is it right here. And I will caution you about this. This might not work. So,
I agree. One of the main things they were talking about on the forums is that the fact that you put your settings in, and for some reason the game is just disregarding them.
limiting the frame rate through this utility or enabling VSync, which also limits the frame rate, through the actual game itself might not actually work. If the game itself is allowing your computer to run wild during this cutscene, it might be bypassing all of this.
And by run wild, he means, I think, he means that there's no upper limit of what they just let your computer use as much compute, which is CPU, GPU, memory, as much as possible without the worry about it choking off, blue screening, bricking, whatever. In this case, we're talking about the GPU, so, and memory, graphics memory as well.
So what I would suggest is instead of doing it here, I would do it within the panel itself.
Yeah.
Now, NVIDIA is obviously...
This is what I did. This is what I ended up doing.
3080 Ti, so we don't have to worry about AMD here. If it is a NVIDIA issue with the NVIDIA card, then go to the NVIDIA control panel. And right here you can see I have in the control panel under Manage 3D Settings, the global setting and the program setting is max frame rate, and you can set the maximum frame rate that is allowable by the card. Now you don't...
Yeah, you also want to look at what your proper settings for your monitor are as well to make that setting. But it's a very valid point that he's making here. This is a better way to govern the max limit of what you're allowing your computer and GPU to do within the game, so that the game doesn't run wild and absorb all of the graphics power, memory, etc., and make the card lock up and theoretically something worse than just having to do a reboot or something.
Have to set it to some realistic number. You don't have to set it to 60, you don't have to set it to 120, you don't have to set it to 144, you could set it to 500. The goal here is to prevent the card from ever running wild. To make...
let me stop there. Like I just said, you should match what your native resolution for the monitor is and what your monitor can do.
Sure that the card never reaches some crazy, ridiculous FPS number that it would otherwise not be able to obtain. Now, you could potentially just set this up for Diablo IV. But if you have an RTX 3080 Ti Gigabyte card, we know now that there is a fatal flaw in the card. Now, does yours specifically have the fatal flaw? The answer to that question is we don't know. The fatal flaw could be something that affected 1 out of every 10, or 3 out of every 10, or it could have affected 10 out of every 10 cards.
Once again, going back to my original statement on the manufacturing process on silicon, it's just not all created equal. They're supposed to sort it and have different testing processes if the GPU, if the memory chips meet certain specifications. If not, they go back in the bin and they either get recycled or something else gets done with them. Sometimes they get put on inferior products, like, say for instance, it's a 3080 and they're looking at the memory chip for the 3080. And this is just a general example. It's not a specific example. But say for instance that chip fails the certification for a 3080, it may be used on a 3050 because it may work fine for a 3050, but it's not quite up to spec for a 3080.
Cards. We don't know specifically what's going on right now, but if you do have this particular card, this might want to be a precaution that you could take to prevent the card from ever running wild past that stressful point, which could potentially trigger the issue.
I agree. It's just a Band-Aid, though. This should never have, I don't know.
Now, hopefully Gigabyte will come forward and have some sort of RMA process to fix these cards, but you definitely want to prevent your card from taking any damage.
I agree.
And it's not just Diablo IV that could potentially cause issues. Any game that has a something like this which could stress the card out could potentially produce the fault.
It's
not
a good
just
point.
Diablo IV. In the past, this has happened with a previous game. If you guys remember.
And it's not just games. It's any other program that possibly uses your GPU, such as rendering video, rendering 3D graphics, if you're doing your job, etc.
Remember, there was a big hubbub and hoodoo over a very specific card that was dying when playing the game New World. It was the EVGA.
Yeah, I remember that because I played New World at the beginning too.
The EVGA RTX 3090 had a fault they found out. As you can see right here, it says EVGA said it received about 24 dead GeForce RTX 3090 cards believed to have failed from playing the New World beta.
24? The way it came out on the news, it sounded like it was a lot more than that.
All of the cards were earlier production run cards manufactured in 2020. Under an X-ray analysis, they appear to have poor workmanship on soldering around the card's MOSFET circuits that powered the impacted cards.
Once again, back to what I was talking about, inferior workmanship or poor quality chips or whatever.
In other words, a hardware failure.
Yeah.
Now, that does not necessarily mean that these RTX 3090s, even with this problem, might not have survived for 5-10 years.
Correct.
But put under stress.
And like this, if you've got a 3090, obviously you're probably buying that to play a higher end game because you're a gamer, or possibly a video editor, or possibly a graphics renderer or something like that. But I think overall he's got a very good point. If you bought a 3090 and all you did was play older MMOs like EverQuest or something like that, you may never see this fault because it's not pushing that graphics card half of what it could do.
Those faults will reveal themselves. So at this moment, basically what we can determine from this is that if you are in possession of this particular card, the RTX 3080 Ti made by Gigabyte, you may or may not have a ticking time bomb. I would definitely not put it under an
That's a good way to
stress.
put it.
In fact, I would totally even be completely understanding if you didn't even want to play the Diablo IV beta.
I agree. I probably
for
wouldn't
fear
either.
that it might brick your card. However, there's no guarantee that another game might not do the same thing.
Exactly.
Any game that's going to stress out the card, any game that pushes it to that limit is probably going to cause the same problem.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I can say on this topic. I do obviously hope that you guys don't get your cards bricked. And for those of you who did not participate in early access beta, and maybe you do have one of these cards and you were planning on participating in the open beta, consider this your forewarning. There are a couple threads and various things going on right now. There is a thread on the official Diablo IV forums, which I can actually pull up here. If you do have one of the cards, perhaps it would be a good idea to peruse over and see what you can figure out. There is a lot of people
Yeah,
in
I've been
here
on the
pooling
threads
their knowledge,
this
and I've
week
kind of
looking
like
through
gone
them.
over about as many of these as I can. But it really does seem like it's strictly the RTX Gigabyte 3080 Ti, and that's kind of a load off my mind because I have the 30.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because he just goes through his outro. Big shout out to Ginger Gaming Monitor, or Mentor, sorry. And I'll leave the link to the original video in the show notes. Very good piece of information on, you know, I'm in IT as on a daily living, and I've dealt with hardware for years. I felt this was very important to go ahead and push forward, react a little bit, give my take on it. With that said, this is Bronzedrag0n with a reaction video. I hope you're doing well, and I will see you on the flip side.